parents are the number one expert in the world on their own kids. I mean, you're it, Nobody loves your kids more than you do. Nobody is more committed to your kids' success than you are. I mean, come on. Cut yourself some slack, mom and dad. You know what I mean? It was like, and so there was that part of it. And initially it became trying to empower them with a mindset of saying, no, look, there are very good reasons why you should be trusting yourself and not trusting the people that are quote unquote experts on these things. And as we delved in it more and more, we realized that there's a kind of multiple components to this. So in preparing kids for life, we focus on the 5 dimensions of development. We call it 360 degree parenting, where you have spiritual, emotional, mental, social, and physical. So it's about cultivating all 5 of these in our children, 360 degrees, so that we're creating men and women who are fully engaged as the best version of themselves. They're prepared to take on life and pursue whatever it is that God has put in their path to go after.
Welcome to the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast. Like most business owners, you already know you need good business and marketing strategies to scale and be profitable. But at some point, you've hit the dreaded wall where you feel stuck and frustrated. EQ for Entrepreneurs is for business owners and leaders who are honest enough to admit that they just might be the ones holding their business back and are brave enough to change that.
We're Noble and Kathy, and every week we're having candid conversations about all things emotional intelligence and how growing that has allowed us to get out of our own way and is radically transforming both our businesses and our personal lives. This is the secret sauce strategy for modern entrepreneurs who are tired of hustling without seeing results and want to grow a business and a life that they love.
Welcome, entrepreneurs, leaders, and influencers. I am so excited for this episode and interview with a friend of mine named Daniel Hagadorn. He's got a background in the entertainment publicity industry, and then from there he went into public and private high school teaching for 14 years. He's also a homeschool dad and an entrepreneur. His company is Preparing Kids for Life. We cover some great topics throughout this episode, and really the basis of this episode is how to create an emotionally stable family. So if you have a family, if you want to have a family, man, I'm so excited for you to listen to this. We cover questions like why he chose to homeschool his daughter as a public high school teacher, how he started his business, and some of the different factors that he noticed about children in the public school system from his 14 years in the public education system. Also, we discussed how to raise emotionally healthy children. We discussed some things about how should parents begin the journey of working on themselves. One of the quotes he said that really, really hit me was, "How much is your emotional pain costing you?" So excited for you to listen to this episode. Please rate, review the podcast if you get something out of it, and share it with your friends. You're going to love this episode. All right. What's up, Big Daniel? Great to see you, man.
You too.
Thank you so much for being willing to let me interview you here for our EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast.
Always.
We go back a little ways, right? When was the last time I interviewed you? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think we were talking earlier. I think it has been probably like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's great. And can you share? So one of the reasons I interviewed you, you're let's see, your background, 14-year public high school teacher, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, public and private, and then we've been homeschooling our daughter since she was 4, and she's unbelievably 15 now.
Our daughter's about to be 13, to be a teenager, and I'm still like Where's my little baby girl?
I know. It's sad.
So share with us a little bit about your background. Like tell us that journey a little bit, and then I'll start getting into some questions about how to raise an emotionally healthy family.
So you mean like about teaching? I got into teaching. So I was working in entertainment publicity for a while, and I just always wanted to be a teacher going back to when I was in 11th grade. So I kind of found myself at this turning point of like, do I continue doing this job for a paycheck, or do I pursue what I believe my passion is? And so I ended up deciding to pursue my passion instead of the paycheck, and started my teaching career. And so I started out as a long-term sub, and then at a public school, and then went from there to a private school, and then went back 1 year into a public school. And then I spent 1 year working just with special needs kids. I worked with them in the school system too, but then I spent 1 year just with special needs at a place called Brain Balance. And then I worked for another year with special needs kids in the public school system. And then I've kind of been working, on and off. I love being around kids. So I kind of, there's one school, it's Founders, which is Hillsdale College. They started a charter school system. So that's like the one school where I'll go back and I'll still sub because I love doing it, and they're great kids. So I can't totally give, it all up. But yeah, that's kind of how it's progressed over the last, 15, 16 years. So.
And you were even doing, because I remember from our last interview 4 or 5 years ago, that you were even doing some AP classes, right? Or no? Were you doing some AP classes?
Yeah. So I taught AP U.S. history for several years, and then I had 1 year in Challenge 1, and that was a lot. That was actually probably my favorite year teaching, because it was in Challenge 1 that I felt like, okay, this is what a teacher should be able to do. Like where you go and you're putting questions out there and you're just sort of guiding the discussion, but the discussion is activated by the students, and the students are able to do that because they've actually read and they've actually engaged and they've actually thought about it on their own and for themselves. And they're now bringing their opinions and their perspective to the table and then interacting with it. And so I was like, that was, I mean, I love teaching. Don't get me wrong. I loved, every year I've been doing it. I had a great time, but I was that year Challenge 1. I was like, okay, this is what teaching's supposed to feel like. You know what I mean? It was awesome.
That's awesome. And for those not familiar, Challenge 1 is ninth grade, is like freshman year in a homeschool program called Classical Conversations that uses the classical method or the Socratic method for education. So it's a lot of discussion-based learning, a lot of questions, a lot of discussion-based, which is awesome. I mean, you think about it as, for me as an adult, I love learning in that environment myself, and just in conversations, so it's neat that they've applied that model to the whole, to a children's education.
Oh, yeah, it's awesome.
Versus I had some amazing public school teachers, because I'm a public school guy. I had some great public school teachers, some not so great. But I was the guy who always asked. I was the guy that always asked the questions. But it's like, Noble, like, dude, just sit in the corner and don't talk until kind of thing. Come on, man, right? So anyway, I'm just curious. Again, this is not necessarily. I mean, it'll be part of the podcast because I'm curious, but like, why as a 14, 15-year public school teacher did you make a transition? Because this actually may be a good lead in to our conversation about raising an emotionally healthy family. What led you after 14, 15 years in the education system to decide to, home educate, your own child? And I think it's very relevant actually, because I mean, look at our country right now, right? So I think a lot of people millions maybe are making that decision across the country. What led you to that decision or conclusion?
Yeah, we have the accidental homeschooler, right? So, or the involuntary homeschooler. But it's funny. There's two things. So I honestly feel like it was the hand of God that blessed me with discovering John Taylor Gatto before I started my teaching career. I am absolutely fully convinced that I would have been a very, very different teacher if I had not read his books prior to really getting into my teaching career. And so that was, I wish, it's so sad. One of my dreams is I wanted to see him before he passed on, and he passed on, and I was never able to meet him. But I kind of look at him literally like a mentor, even though we never met, but just through his books, it meant that much to me.
Yeah. And so just very quickly for everyone listening, it's John Taylor Gatto, and it's Gatto. Can you share some of the titles of the books? Do you remember any?
Sure. Yeah. One of them is Weapons of Mass Instruction. Another is The Underground History of Public Education. So he has a number of books actually that are very detailed. They're very readable, but they're also very well researched. And he lays out, this is what our system is all about. And so I kind of felt like I want to be the cog in the wheel. I want to sort of stand in the gap. And I know that I only have a certain number of kids that I have responsibility for every year, but those kids that I'm responsible for, I want to at least hopefully interject something into their life that changes it, that becomes, a turning point, or just something for them to really think about and reflect back on later on and think, yeah, that's, because I just watched a school system just chew kids up and spit them out.
Wow.
And it was a very, although I love teaching and I was very passionate about it, it also weighed very heavily on my heart. It was painful to watch what happens with kids and how they're categorized and how they're limited and how their potential is never really cultivated. It's just about standardizing predictability and about, kind of creating this level where kids are just indoctrinated into thinking certain things, and you make them believe and think and respond in a predictable manner. And that's really what it is. Now, I say all that to say that what Gatto did is he lets you watch the sausage being made, so to speak,
Wow.
And so I would never have realized that was going on, except that I had read his books. And when I read his books and then I saw what was going on, like, I was able to make that connection because I had read his stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's really what's happening here.
And you were in the system, so you were in the same system that he was talking about, so you could like, oh my goodness, I can see this now. And for those that maybe are not familiar with John Taylor Gatto, he, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but he was a 30-year teacher, right? 30-year teacher.
3-time New York City Teacher of the Year, 1-time New York State Teacher of the Year. I mean, he was extremely accomplished. And he actually did his resignation on the op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. And that was how he retired. It was like,
really?
Yeah. And he retired because he's like, yeah, I've done my best to try to work within the system and try to help kids, but I can't watch it anymore.
Wow.
And so he went a different route. So that was the first thing that really helped me and inspired me in my teaching. And then I think the second thing, now I'm trying to work my way back to the original question.
Yeah. So how you made the transition from
right, how I transitioned. So there was that was part of the transition. And then part of it was just seeing that with the kids in my class, there'd be some that were very mature for their age. And they also asked very thoughtful questions. They weren't the kind of like, what does this assignment do? And how many paragraphs does it have to be? And like, it was more, like delving into things, and they would be bringing in outside, like, oh, wow, how did you even know about that author? He's not part of it. And so I would, talk to him after class and, oh yeah, well, I was homeschooled for a few years, and then I kept hearing that. And then, after a couple years, it was like, you were homeschooled, right? Yeah. How'd you know? Yeah, well,
Wow.
And so it was really, and it's funny, they were a lot more mature, and they're now, obviously you can have socially awkward kids wherever. I don't care. Charter school, private school, public school, homeschool, like, you know what I mean? Like but in general, there's just something about that maturity that just made them stand head and shoulders above the rest. So kind of putting together what I knew about the educational system from Gatto, and then what I actually saw being around homeschool kids when we had our daughter was born a few years later, and we started thinking about how we were going to educate her. It kind of became just a no-brainer. Like, yeah, we're going to homeschool her. There's no question.
Wow. That's great. And so how did you get into your business? So Preparing Kids for Life is your business. And how did you get into that? How did you start your business? How did that transition happen?
Well, initially it was something that I saw kind of being in the homeschool world, was that parents were getting incredibly insecure and anxious and fearful right around the middle school, high school mark. And so while they were gung-ho initially about homeschooling their kids, over and over and over again, it would be like, oh my gosh, I have to turn my kids over to the experts. I don't want to mess them up, and which was heartbreaking, because I'm like, man, parents are the number one expert in the world on their own kids. I mean, you're it, Nobody loves your kids more than you do. Nobody is more committed to your kids' success than you are. I mean, come on, cut yourself some slack, mom and dad. You know what I mean? It was like, and so there was that part of it. And initially it became trying to empower them with a mindset of saying, no, look, there are very good reasons why you should be trusting yourself and not trusting the people that are quote unquote experts on these things. And as we delved in it more and more, we realized that there's a kind of multiple components to this. So in Preparing Kids for Life, we focus on the 5 dimensions of development. We call it 360 degree parenting, where you have spiritual, emotional, mental, social, and physical. So it's about cultivating all 5 of these in our children, 360 degrees, so that we're creating men and women who are fully engaged as the best version of themselves. They're prepared to take on life and pursue whatever it is that God has put in their path to go after. And so that kind of became the next stage in the development. And then we realized, well, what's really holding people back from that is a mindset. Well, where did that mindset come from? And how do we break that mindset down? Because unless you change the mindset, all that happens is, and I saw this over and over again too, that was really sad, is you do public school at home. And that's what it was. You just like, you're a homeschooler, yes, but you do public school at home, not, and you have this wonderful opportunity that's being missed. And, it's not the fault of the parents. It's like, how do you know what you don't know? Like, all you know is how you were educated. So it's very hard to kind of think about education in a very different way. I'll give you one example. So grades. What do grades measure? I mean, you know what? As a teacher, do you know how many students I had that aced the test that couldn't speak intelligently about the material that was on that test? You know how many students I've had over the years that got C's or D's or sometimes even F's who could actually carry on a great conversation about that material? Like, grades mean nothing. If you want to measure whether learning has happened, and that's frankly the only thing that matters is learning, is if you can teach something in simple terms to somebody else, you've learned it. If you can't do that, then all we're talking about is degrees of familiarity. That's it. So that's like just one example, right? And, but people get all hung up on grades, and then it's like, it doesn't mean what you think it means.
And man, I love that, Daniel, because that was me. You just mentioned Noble. So I was honestly, I was a straight A student, right? I was a straight A student, rocked it. I could memorize anything. And then I get to West Point, and West Point has it's not quite the Socratic method, but it's really close. They call it the Thayer method. So there's some discussion and stuff, but it's teacher led, but with some other discussion and stuff. And man, sitting and, trying to have a conversation or discussion about what I learned in high school, I was like, man, I dumped that the day after I took the test. I smoked the test. I got an A on it. Look at me. I'm a 4.0 student or whatever. But dude, to carry on a conversation about the Civil War or, World War I or whatever, I was like, dude, I have no idea. Right. And so I was definitely that guy. And so now, obviously we're 8 years into homeschooling and stuff now, starting 9th year. And I like to call myself also like a professional learner because I love learning. Right. And so how do you, we get caught up in, man, you talk about helping create emotionally unhealthy children is classifying, right? And John Taylor Gatto talks about that. Oh, well, check me out. I'm an A student, right? Oh, well, Daniel, you're a B student, and right. And so we create these classifications and now our self-image, and God forbid you get an F, right? I got lots of fantastics at West Point, lots, right? And how much of our self-image gets wrapped around our academic acumen when, like you said, maybe there's a C student who's right next to me who could do an hour-long keynote on the Civil War or, but he got a C and here I got the A and I can't tell you the first thing about it, right? Kind of thing. Yeah. So, anyway, continue on. That was great point about the grades, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, and so, Gatto, kind of talks about this. There's these things that we learn just by virtue of the fact that we're in the system. We sort of absorb it. It's in the drinking water, it's in the DNA. And so we just kind of osmose this in. And if you think about it, we have 18,200 hours, K through 12. And you know what's really sad? So check this out. This is the one thing I put together when I was writing my book, and I figured this out. So Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers. And in that book, he cites a number of social scientists that have developed what's known as the 10,000 hour rule, right? And it doesn't mean that if you say, for example, play golf for 10,000 hours, you become the next Tiger Woods. But it does mean that if you practice golf for 10,000 hours, you're going to be like in the top, 1% of people. Maybe you're not on the pro tour, but you're going to be better than almost everybody else, right? Or anything that you practice or study for 10,000 hours, you're a world-class level expert at it. Well, you're in school for 18,200 hours. What are our high school kids graduating? What are they a world-class level expert in and almost a world-class level expert in something else? I don't know. I mean, National Association of Scholars a few years ago did a research project, and they found that only 31% of college graduates can read and understand a complex book. That's college graduates. So, I mean, you know what I mean? Like there's a something happening in there, and kids are the ones that are paying the biggest price, and they're paying that price in terms of lost potential. One of my not favorite, but I guess you could say saddest things is there's a guy, Dr. George Land, who he actually has a couple of great TED Talks, but he was hired by NASA to identify creative thinkers because clearly NASA places a very high premium on finding people like that. They want the innovators, right? So he developed this test, and this test was so successful that he started administering it to various cohorts of kids, and they've replicated this hundreds of times since then. But he gave it to 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, when they were 5, and then again when they were 10, and then at 15, and then when they were 25 and older. And he found the spark of creative genius was in 98% of those 5-year-olds. By the time those same children were 25 and older, only 2% was left. The school system literally sucks the creative genius out of kids.
Wow.
And that totally aligns with what Gatto talks about is the true purpose of the system itself. And so, it's just, you start to see this and you go, this is what's happening to the mental and emotional and spiritual and social and physical aspects of our kids, in that. And so, that's like, we believe that parents are the number one experts on their own kids. So we just want parents to be equipped with the mindset and the map to navigate the journey of parenting. And everybody's journey of parenting is different, That's why I kind of like the map. Like a map just gives you the lay of the land. It doesn't tell you where to go. It doesn't tell you how fast or slow to go. It doesn't tell you whether to take a plane or a train or hike or whatever. It just gives you the lay of the land, and then you decide how you want to navigate it, And I think that parents just, I want them to have that same confidence, because I think parents are awesome. I think parents have been given a unique gifting by God. There is something that no other parent can give their kids but them. And, that's why I believe that parents get attacked so much. I mean, we just live in a culture where parenting and the family is attacked on every side, and parents just get beat down and beat. I mean, we give a lot more honor and respect people that play parents on TV and in films than we do actual parents who are raising their kids, who are working 1 and 2 jobs and making all these sacrifices and doing their very best and just pouring and pouring and pouring their lives and their souls into their kids, not for some award, but because they just love their kids. But there's no acknowledgement for that. What parents get is a brick to the head at every turn because of how, I look at it like, perfect example is The Simpsons, right? So there's a template. So dad is a big doofus whose only value is a paycheck. That is, if he's not an abusive alcoholic who abandoned the family. Then mom is like this multitasking wizard who's just, keeping all these balls spinning, all the time. And then you have your 2 snarky sages, otherwise known as kids, who are outsmarting mom and dad at every turn. And that's like our template. And it's funny, except that like C.S. Lewis talks about, if you mock something for long enough, pretty soon you lose respect and regard for it. And that's exactly what's happened. And so I just want to be like, we want to be like advocates for parents, and just like lift up parents and get behind them and lift their arms up. And because, man, parents are awesome, and they just don't get that. And they don't understand how awesome God has made them to be.
That's right. And ultimately, parents are raising the next generation, right, to run and lead this country, this world. And so, man, what an important job than our legacy that's going to outlast us and outlive us. And so what greater, and like you said, we have a limited time to do that. I mean, our daughter, right, is about to be 13. I mean, it's a limited time frame there. So, okay. So let me ask you this, Daniel. So with so much, I agree with you, so much attack on the family, so much attack on parents, so much attack on children. And, again, with just about every institution that they're a part of, each institution wants to input their own, thought process, mindset, whatever, right? And maybe some of that may be good, and some of that may not be good, right? So how and also with the dynamic that we're currently living in the state of our world today, with so much uncertainty, unpredictability, the information changes, and not just that, not only does it change on a daily basis, but obviously you got 10 different camps of information of, right. And we could go on and on, but so with so much unpredictability and instability in our nation, in our world, and I would even go one step further to say, it seems like, being in the emotional health space, emotional intelligence space, I am not super confident in the emotional intelligence of our nation.
Yeah.
Right. As is evidenced by how a bunch of people are responding. Right. So you can theorize and all this stuff, but let's just look at the results, right? Let's look at the results of what's going on. Okay. So given that landscape, for children to grow up in, how do we raise emotionally healthy children?
Well, it's funny. The answer is actually really simple, but absolutely not easy. You know what I mean? It's like there's basically, a couple of things I learned from teaching. And one of the most important things is that kids do not expect us to be perfect. They don't expect that we're always going to know or say or do the right thing. And thank goodness, because we don't. But they're very gracious. I mean, incredibly gracious. But the trade-off for that graciousness is that we better not be a hypocrite. If we have a home face and a work face and a church face and a, whatever, man, that's probably, I would suggest, the only, quote, unforgivable sin of parenting is hypocrisy. If we own our stuff, if we apologize and mean it, then we are doing two things at once. One is we're building emotional security and safety for our kids. But number two, we're also showing and demonstrating our kids, this is what it means to take responsibility. Now, can you imagine what our world would look like if everybody in it was taking personal responsibility for their lives?
It'd be a different ball game.
I don't even know what that would look like. It'd be so amazing, right? So that's just one simple thing. However, is that easy? No, it's not at all easy, to own that and do that. But it's so, I had one time where I forget what was going on exactly, but I remember I was very frustrated. I was very agitated, and we were in this store, and my daughter was asking me, about dad, and she kept asking me. And finally I looked at her and I was like, Landry, you need to shut up. And I was like that, like intense and mean. And I could see in her eyes in that moment, her just like wilt. And I just had this moment of like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And I kind of had to pull myself together a little bit. And then I kneeled in front of her. I said, Landry, that was so wrong of me. I am so sorry. I should never have spoken to you like that. I don't ever want you to feel like you can't ask me a question or that what you need is unimportant. And I'm so sorry. And she was crying. She's like, I forgive you. And she gave me a big hug, and it was awesome. And the coolest thing is that I was sharing that story we were doing like a presentation on it, and my daughter was in the audience, and she said, I don't even remember that. And I was like, that's awesome. That's awesome. So it was just a very, sorry. So it was just a really cool moment that was happening in all of that. And I think that it helped me that it happened early on, because it kind of impressed that. And, even earlier than that, when I was teaching, I had, it was my first year teaching, and this is before I had kids. And I think this is probably the lesson that where I really got it. And so my kids I gave them the first test, and, they finished. And so we have some extra time. Like, well, I might as well get a jump start on grading. And so I went looking for my answer key, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I looked everywhere again, and then I looked everywhere again. And finally I'm like, one of these kids took that answer key. Unbelievable. So for 5 minutes, I lit into it. Like, I can't believe this lack of integrity. Like, I'm going off and off and off and off. And then I had like a podium in the front, and I had a little shelf where I would keep my tea. And so I went in to grab my tea, because I'm like, I need to warm my throat, because I got another 5 minutes. I'm going to lay into these kids, man. And underneath my tea mug was the answer key. And I'm like, oh. I just had like, I remember that Southwest Airlines commercial, Want to Get Away? Like that was me. I'm like, oh my gosh, if I could have gotten away anywhere, if I could have been in Antarctica, I was like,
Right.
oh no. But I just kind of steel myself and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I had the test. Oh, I'm so sorry. I yelled at you. Please forgive me. And it was great. And then of course the whole rest of the year, every time I took a test, the answer key is Hagadorn. But it was great. I mean, like we had a great year about it and it was awesome. And I was like, man, kids are really forgiving because I was really lighting into them and they were totally forgiving and totally gracious. And all I had to do was own it. And not that owning your stuff is easy, but it was like, oh. And so that's one of those things that, I found that you can do that's simple, but not easy, but it's so powerful because of the relationship that it builds. And because again, hypocrisy is one of those, man, I don't know what it is, but kids just like, like I remember growing up with my dad, God bless him, but he'd be like, hey, if you effing swear in this house, you're going to get smacked, and I'm like, okay, Dad. I mean, it's like, what is it? It's so
right.
But it's like, and so it's just one of those things that's simple, but it's not easy. But if we can practice that regularly, it's just the dividends that are reaped from that are just enormous and immense because, we have to deal with our stuff. Because if we don't deal with our stuff, guess who will? Our kids. Mm-hmm. Our kids will have to deal with our stuff.
That's right.
Because that's what we're going to pass on. And, I know that, we all tend to not think about like the end of our lives. We just sort of are in our moment here, but you think about the end and you think about what is the legacy that you want to leave. In fact, it's funny. We had a conversation, you may not even remember this, but we had a conversation, I don't remember when, but a number of years ago. And you made this point and it stayed with me ever since. And you said, the legacy that you leave behind for your kids, you ain't going to find it in a textbook. You're not going to find it in like a teacher's lecture somewhere. That's not what we want to leave. You're not going to leave it. It's not good grades. It's not, a good job. It's the legacy that you leave behind with your kids that matters.
That's right.
And I think that's so true. And that's, I think, what we all think about as parents. Like, what is going to live behind or, when we go, what is going to live past us through our kids? And, it's a special thing. Like my dad, we had a tough relationship growing up. I mean, that's a whole other separate story, but we had a tough relationship growing up. And, I really hated him for periods of my life. And like, I had to work through all that. Part of why I was so insecure about being a dad myself was my childhood. Mm-hmm. And so, but my dad, he eventually developed dementia. We finally brought him to Texas to be with us. And Father's Day rolled around and I wrote him a card and I wrote him a letter because I wanted him to be able to read it again and again and not forget the words that I said, and I just told him everything I admired about him, everything I was grateful for, everything that he had done for me that I appreciated, all the things that I had learned from him and gleaned from him and the examples that he did set for me, that were awesome. And my dad, who I've seen cry twice in my entire life, he's a product of, the Great Depression. And he just was, all that he could get out was, my whole life has been worth it. And that's the legacy right there. Mm. You want to just be able to look at your kids and see all that you've invested and poured into them and go, my whole life's been worth it. Mm. My whole life's been worth it.
Wow. That's awesome. Love that. Love that. You shared something else too before we started, I thought was so powerful. Something to the effect of, let's give our children a childhood that they don't have to recover from.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, so I've done executive coaching for a number of years. And one of the things that, and I've worked with high school students that were going to be Division I athletes. And I've worked with CEOs that are, multimillionaires running big companies and everything in between, again, from teenagers to 60-year-olds, 65-year-olds. And what I noticed in 100% of my coaching clients was that 100%, and I don't have a PhD. I'm not a, certified ninja coaching counselor, all this stuff. But in 100% of the, probably 50 to 70 folks I've coached over the years, 100% of them were exhibiting behaviors as an adult as a direct result of their childhood. 100%.
Yep.
Even the ones that look good, smell good, talk good, walk good, and the ones that you knew were super dysfunctional, 100%. The folks making $30,000 a year, the folks making $30,000 a week, 100% of them were exhibiting behaviors as an adult as a direct result of their childhood. You just have to dig long enough to make those connections. And so, one of the things that we talk about a lot in our EQ podcast is that, growing so we talked about this before we started, is that, so for me, I'm the result or example of not even being aware of my emotions and feelings for my entire life until a few years ago. Didn't realize that those two things even existed, right? Literally discovering ice cubes, 3 or 4 years ago in these two new concepts for me, emotions and feelings.
Right.
Because I was a result of a family, right, of parents that like, hey, I don't care how you feel, like, salute and execute, right? Get the job done, whatever. I don't care if I hurt your feelings. I don't care if you, whatever. And so, boom. So I learned how to get, ultimately 2 PhDs in stuffing and avoiding, right? Yeah. Which I don't recommend. And so you got 2 choices, right? 2 in the military, we call it COAs, courses of actions. One course of action is continue on your current trajectory and just stuffing and avoiding your feelings and emotions. Well, that was fine and good when I was a little kid and I could stuff and avoid, and it was a cute fur little monkey. But then multiply the stuffing and avoiding times decade after decade after decade. And now that cute fur little monkey has now turned into King Kong and just wrecks stuff, right? Yeah. Because pain that's not transformed will be transferred. Pain and bitterness that's not transformed will be transferred. Okay, so that's one course of action, which I decided, thankfully, hey, I'm not going to continue to go down this road because I was already starting to hurt my wife because I'd yelled at her a few times and that was not how I rolled. And I definitely didn't want to do that to my kid because now, right, so the other course of action is, like you said, is to work on yourself and that's how we can help raise emotionally healthy children is by working on this stuff ourselves. Yeah. Okay. So, but neither one is sexy, right? It's not right. It's no fun to have an EQ, an emotional intelligence of a 5-year-old as an old guy, right? That's no fun. And we've all seen them.
Yep.
I've seen them in the military, high-ranking folks. I've seen them in corporate America. I've seen very successful entrepreneurs, multimillionaires that have the emotional intelligence of a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
I've seen it, right? And that's no fun. Everyone knows them, but it's like the elephant in the room.
Yep.
And so, or I can choose, man, I've got to face myself. I've got to do the uncomfortable work of working through, the emotional injuries that I have had over my lifetime in order to not only improve my own quality of life, but also to impact the trajectory of my family's legacy in my children.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of talked about that as well. Right. So any thoughts on that? How should parents go about beginning that journey of working on themselves, of facing themselves, knowing that it's not sexy, it's not, necessarily fun. The outcome is tremendous, is life-changing, but the work itself is, so any thoughts or recommendations?
Yeah, and that's such a great point because that's where it is. And absolutely, there's nothing fun about it. But you know what? The thing that you got to ask is, how much is your pain costing you? You know, how much is it costing you? You know, how much is it costing the marriage you could have? How much are you paying for the parent that you could be but aren't? You know, and how much are your kids paying for that? You know, how many people could you be helping with your unique set of gifts that you're not, because you're trapped in all of this stuff? There's so much more that God intends for us that we owe it. We owe it to him and everybody else around to work through our stuff so that we can be everything he made us to be, everything he intended us to be. And the hard part I've found in all of this work is that you have to deal, it starts with the belief system. And so we have, I don't know how they figure this out, but 95% of what we believe, like our core foundational beliefs, is in place by the time we're 18. Now, that would be kind of grim news, except for the magic of God and neuroplasticity. You know what I mean? Those two things are saving grace, God and neuroplasticity. And since God created neuroplasticity, it's pretty much God, you know. But, you know, so we have that. But that is something that has to be acknowledged. So we're starting off, and when I say foundational beliefs, I mean what we believe about God, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about other people, what we believe about how life works, core foundational beliefs. And if those beliefs are not aligned with the truth, then we are living in a distorted version of the world. We are living in a distorted emotional space. It's almost like putting on, you know, like glasses. So like if these glasses were tinted blue, it doesn't matter what I'm looking at, it's all blue. No matter what, I could be looking at something green or yellow or orange or pink or purple. It looks blue because that's my glasses. And that's kind of what those core foundations are. So the first part is kind of taking those glasses off, you know, and part of where we see these distortions are in our emotional lives, you know, and it's in trauma. And we don't know how to process trauma because we weren't taught how to process trauma. Like, so for example, you know, somebody's going through something, the Grief Recovery Institute, which is, I looked at like 106 things that people typically say in a situation where grief and loss has occurred. Only 4 of them are helpful. People say like, oh, you know what? I know how you feel. I lost a father too. No, you don't. You have no idea. My relationship with my dad and your relationship with your dad were totally different relationships. So you can't possibly know. What if I had a wonderful, warm relationship and you had a horrible, abusive relationship? So just because we've both lost a dad doesn't mean you have any idea how I feel. And not only that, but telling somebody that minimizes their feelings, right? So now it's like, in other words, we have this unconscious way where we just want people to get over it so that we don't have to deal with the ickiness of the feeling. Like, because we don't know how to be around somebody like that because we don't even know how to process that feeling ourselves. And so we just try to say things that kind of like, okay, so let's just move on. And the problem with grief and loss, and there's a lot, I mean, people tend to think of it as death and divorce, and there's over 40 different kinds of losses that can happen. You know, like you can move, and that's a loss. Like a lot, basically it's a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So even if, let's say you were moving from one house to another house and it was awesome, it was a better job that was paying more money that you loved even more, and the house was even bigger and better in a better neighborhood, like everything's better. It still is a change in behavior. It's a pattern shift. And so there's a loss that's there, but we don't process that loss. And what happens with losses is they just stack and they stack and they don't go anywhere. They just stack and stack. And so until they're processed, they just stay there. And then what happens is we get triggered. And then usually, like you mentioned earlier, you have all these people that, you know, have like the emotional IQ of a 5-year-old. They're constantly triggered and they just respond to the trigger. You know, and that's one of the blessings of processing through this stuff is that you create space for yourself. in situations where you are actually free to make a choice. You're not like, oh, there's my reaction to it. It's, oh, I have some space. Now, am I going to respond in an angry, immature way? Am I going to, and the thing is we still have, muscles still have memory, right? So we're going to tend to, go however we process it. But at least once you processed it, there's space now. There's some freedom that's been carved out to make a different choice, right? And then the more we make a different choice, the more that muscle grows and strengthens until that becomes the new reflex. And that's like neuroplasticity. You're changing the way that your brain is processing something. And you're doing it by actually processing. And so part of what, like grief recovery, which is what really my wife and I have both used. And my wife loved it so much, she became a grief recovery specialist and has taken, I don't know how many hundreds of people through that over the last 17 years. But it's really giving people the tools to process these things so that they're not living in a constant state of triggers. Because what happens is if you don't process it, then you're stuck in the past. So something happens now and it's connected to this and this and this. And like all of a sudden you're back there when you were 5 years old and your dad said, da, 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 da. You never live in the moment. You never live here. You're just in this weird space where something happens and you immediately go to the past instead of living free in the moment. And living free in the moment is what allows you to make different choices, and different choices what builds new habits and builds new, emotional muscles, so to speak, so that you're living in a much healthier way. And I mean, that's really been the biggest difference, is going through and processing all of this grief and loss in my life so that when things happen, I'm not triggered, I'm not drawn in, I'm not getting sucked back, I'm just in my moment. Now, does that mean that I respond? No, I don't. I make all kinds of mistakes and whatever. But there's a whole different sense of freedom. I mean, the only way I can think of to explain it is I used to feel like I was watching my life on TV. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't even my life. It was like somebody else's life. And it'd be like, wow, that looks like that might be sad. Boy, I might be angry if that happened. Almost I was so detached, and living in the moment is a little bit of a scary thing because you actually feel things. But on the other hand, you start to feel so alive that you never want to go back either. You're like, I'll take the pain. Because you know what? Like when things happen, I'm like, you know what? Tears are great. Tears is the price of love. I mean, like that meant I really loved someone or something. It mattered. I started looking at scars differently. Like I love the analogy of scars now, because scars mean two things. Number one, it means the wound mattered. It happened. It was real. It mattered. It meant something. But the other thing is it means that the wound has been healed. Mm-hmm. And now there's a scar to remind me of what God has changed in me. Mm-hmm. There's a reminder of what God has done to heal me. And it's a monument that brings encouragement, instead of, this pain or whatever, or like I'm not ashamed of any of my scars now,
That's right. 100%. And that's such a powerful analogy. Such a powerful analogy. Our daughter almost died when she was 2, and she had 2 chest tubes, and they did a thoracotomy. So she's got multiple scars on her. And I'm like, man, are you kidding me? As a parent, I celebrate that, because the alternative, right, is it would have been life changing. So I definitely get that. That's a very powerful analogy, and then also my own, right? Because the other thing I feel like, I'm a very super transparent dude, and I feel like a lot, and I've heard this quote before, and a lot more people can relate with your valleys than your mountaintops. And I like, can I relate with some zillionaire CEO who has an international? No, I can't. But I can relate with when he made a stupid decision, right? Because I've got that T-shirt for sure. So I love that, and I love what you said there about just the grief loss process, and that whole process. applies to handling any emotions, right? And here's the other thing too that's been really interesting since we've been on this emotional growth journey, my wife and I, for the last 3 years now, is that the irony, the crazy thing, man, again, so I'm relatively new to this space, but we've spent the last 3 years being very intentional to work through this stuff. And what's been fascinating is, so my whole life, right, didn't know they even existed, this whole concept, right, of feelings and emotions. And so now I'm 3 years into this, but also well into my life, right, probably in the third quarter of my life here. And like, why on earth am I learning this now? Like, so every human being has feelings and emotions, yet who teaches anybody right now? Obviously there's some parents out there probably that are on their game and they're teaching their kids this stuff nowadays, right? In where we're at now. But I know especially like our generation and obviously generations before us, like what, again, feelings of never, right? So we all have these things, but many of us don't know. We don't have the tools to know how to handle them or deal with them or process them, but we all have them and they impact every single decision that we make. Yep. Business-wise, family-wise, faith-wise, fill in the blank, our emotional grid, our emotional wiring impact, it goes through, every decision goes through our emotional processing, point of being. And it's fascinating that we live in a world where I feel the majority of us are not equipped or not trained on how to handle this stuff. And so for me, I mean, that's why we started our podcast. Like for me, this has been revolutionary. I'm talking life-changing, Daniel. And another analogy I thought of too when you were talking, I've used before, but it just made me think of it again. Me prior to my EQ growth, my emotional, if you were to chart my emotions, right, it would look like an EKG monitor. Even though I was very much like you had expressed there, I was kind of detached in some ways. But in other ways, I would go up and down, very extremes, super over the top or like super hardcore depressed. Now, after the past few years, my emotional chart now looks like a sine curve, right? So it's kind of stabilized a little bit. Now I still have my ups, still have my downs, but they're not extreme and they don't happen within a 5-minute window either. Right. So it's been, and so again, to go back to the point of this whole episode is, as I have stabilized my own emotional, bandwidth, if you will, my own emotional environment for me personally, well, that also and therefore changes the emotional environment that my daughter's in. Right. Yep. So now her emotional world that she's growing up in, the culture of my family now is stabilizing or getting more stable. Because again, I still have lots of work to do, but it's getting more stable. And what I have learned, again, I'm not a PhD and I don't have all these degrees and stuff, but from my understanding, the research and the reading that I have done is that the more stable emotionally the environment is that a child can grow up in, the better, right? It's do you want to surf in rocky waves in a stormy, or do you want to surf, in a nice stable platform? Yeah. And that's, do you want your kid to grow up in a stable, emotionally stable environment, or am I going to get Dr. Jekyll today from my dad, or am I going to get Mr. Hyde today from my dad, right? Or he gets this phone call. Oh man, is he going to, right? And I mean, again, the emotional consequences that leaves in, in your spouse, in your children, right? It's just, it's crazy. So the benefits, again, the benefits of us working on the stuff that you shared and really facing some of these things and learning how to process the gamut of emotions. Because it's not like, here's the other thing too, it's not like, well, I don't like emotions, so I'm just going to shut them off, which is kind of like, they come, right? So it's not if it's coming, it's how do we deal? Not if, it's just how and when, right? And how effective can we be in this space? How can we, how, and the beautiful thing for me that I'm super excited about is that they're tools to learn and skills to learn. We can learn this stuff regardless of whether you're super empathetic or you're not empathetic or all this stuff. Like, everybody can learn to grow in this area, and it will have a direct impact in your children's and our children's lives. And again, ultimately, there are our legacy, right, that we leave behind them. Okay, any final thoughts, Daniel? Any final thoughts? Anything that you would like to share that you haven't shared yet, or anything like that? And again, also too, I want to ask you, how do we follow you and how do we find you and what
Sure.
Books and stuff like that? But before you mention all that stuff, how to find you and follow you and your resources, any final thoughts or encouragement that you could leave with parents on how to raise emotionally healthy children?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just trying to embrace the confidence that God has in you. There's 7.5 billion people on planet Earth. God could have given your kids to anybody he wanted, but he gave them to you. There's something special and unique that God wants to do in you and through you in regards to your kids. And I think the hard thing is that while all of us are drawn to, programs and tips and techniques and 5 easy steps to being an awesome parent and raising awesome kids, and those things sound great. But if we just look at it like there is a way that things work, there are no shortcuts, especially not something as important as parenting. And if you really think about it, like honestly, have you ever done anything in your life that was truly awesome that didn't take work? I've never have. I mean, maybe somebody has, but that's never been my experience. And I think that, remember, you're created in God's image. One of the things that Jesus says is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You're made in God's image. That means something. That means that God has imparted power into you. He's imparted a design and a purpose in you for your own life as well as for your kids. And you as a parent have the amazing responsibility, the incredible opportunity to help raise your child into that design. And I think if you're willing to look at your own life, your own pain, your own wounds, and you're willing to do what it takes to process through them, not only are you going to experience that design that's been laid on your life, but it is going to be so much easier, not easy, but easier to help your child find that design for their life. And that's one of the great joys of being a parent. You're creating this realm in which you're the gatekeeper and the interpreter for your child. And you're determining what is allowed into your child's life. And you're helping your child interpret what happens in their world. And you're showing them by your own example how to process. Because you remember the hard truth is that we cannot give our children something we don't have. And if we haven't dealt with it, they will. And I know that every single parent loves their kids. I don't know a single parent that wouldn't walk in front of a bus for their kid. So this is just that hard work. Like you said earlier, Noble, it's like there's nothing sexy about it, but this is the most important thing there is. Because if you can give your children the gift of everything God intended for you to be as a man or a woman, as a parent, man, I mean, you're talking about a whole different experience in life than you can even imagine right now. And I can tell you, as somebody who's worked through all this other stuff, man, it is worth it. Like I don't have a shred of regret over any of the pain I've ever dealt with, any of the wounds that I've ever experienced healing for, none of that. It was all so worth it. Every time I look at my daughter, I know in my heart of hearts, it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. And that's what I would just leave with parents.
That's awesome, Daniel. Thank you so much, brother. Can you share? So how do we find you? Website, books, resources? How do we follow you?
Well, we do have a free ebook that my wife and I created called Building an Emotionally Healthy Home. And you can go to www.welcomepk4l.com and get that there. We do have a regular website, pk4l.com. We also have a Facebook page you can follow. It's PK4L Tribe. We just, really in a perfect world, I would just sit and I wake up every day and I would just talk to parents and answer questions. Like, you know what I mean? That would really be like the perfect world. Because, I just have a heart for parents, and I want to see them experience the joy that I've experienced in this journey, And I think it's like that with anything. Like, even if something as silly as like you see a good movie, right? You want everybody else to see it too, because it was so amazing, And so that's just some of the resources we have. And we have a lot of, programs like online resources that are available that we sell. But yeah, it's really just about, like I said, giving parents the mindset and the map to navigate that journey with confidence,
That's awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Totally appreciate your time. For those some of you all maybe listen to this episode on our podcast, EQ for Entrepreneurs. Some of you may be watching this on Facebook. Some of you may be watching this on our YouTube channel. Wherever you're at, thank you so much for participating in this growth journey that I feel is life-changing. And after you all have heard from Daniel, I think he's absolutely, confirmed that as well from his perspective and expertise as well. And I pray that there's content that was shared in this episode that will absolutely be a part of impacting and changing your life. And for us, we love helping leaders, influencers, and entrepreneurs navigate the emotional journey of running your business and your life. And thank you so much, Daniel. Totally appreciate you, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man. It was great. It's always great talking to you.
Likewise, brother. God bless you, man. Have a great day.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye.